Hi! So, you might be wondering what's happening right now with my lighting. Well, welcome, first of all, welcome to another Bookish avec moi. Apparently, a few minutes ago, my light bulb just decided to burn out. Yeah, my light bulb has agency, but anyway, it just decided to burn out a few minutes ago, and now it's not functioning anymore. I think I kind of jinxed it by raving so much about the lighting in the last Bookish avec moi, so I guess we're just gonna stuck with this. We're just gonna be stuck with this kind of lighting in this video. Hopefully it will work. But yeah, let's start with some bookish updates. I think in this video I'm just going to talk about some bookish updates. I don't really have anything else that is worthwhile mentioning this week. It has been a very kind of boring week in terms of other things. I mean, I did make some steamed buns earlier today, and that was my first time making steamed buns, but they kind of look like, they look different from usual steamed buns. It was as if I just kind of summoned some demonic eggs from some infernal dimensions somewhere. But yeah, they kind of tasted good, so I suppose it would, it ended up okay at the end, but yeah, it looked ugly. Anyway, let's start with the book. First of all, this is a book that I finished early last week actually, but I didn't really talk it in that last Bookish avec moi because I wasn't really finished with this book. So this is Birdsong by Sebastian. This was a buddy read with Kim of Middle of the Book March. Birdsong, it has a subtitle, a novel of love and war, and before I went into this novel, I thought that I expected that this novel would be about 50% romance and love and relationships and passion, and 50% this muddy, gritty war fiction. And turned out it was exactly like that, which was great. However, I thought that this book overall, it was not stellar. It was just okay, mainly because it has parts that were quite good, but there were also parts that were not so good. So I'm going to talk more about that. First of all, the good part, this novel has excellent war fiction part. So this novel, Birdsong, is actually about this main character named Stephen Raisford. He's an Englishman. And this novel actually follows his story in two separate timelines. One is around the time of sometime before World War I, a few years before World War I, all the way up until the end of World War I. So that's the first timeline. And the second timeline is actually sometime in the 70s, where Stephen is already dead by that time, so we see his granddaughter Elizabeth carrying the story. But essentially what really happens here is that we see two stories of Stephen. One is his story in which he meets a French woman, a married French woman named Isabelle. It kind of happened while he went on a work trip to France. That was around 1910, I think. He went to France for a work trip, and then he fell in love with Isabelle while staying at Isabelle's house, together with Isabelle's family and husband. And they sort of had this relationship, an affair, which was later something they confessed to the husband. But overall, it was kind of like a messy relationship because it's kind of like something that you expect from an affair. And we sort of see how that relationship happens, how it develops after that. And the second story of Stephen is kind of about his involvement in the First World War. So he is fighting in France, and he kind of fights as a fairly higher ranked soldier. So he has this responsibility of leading his soldiers in battle, and it is during this period of fighting that he sees so many horrible things happening in war. People dying. The soldiers he's leading are dying left and right. The way that they die is really violent. It's just so gritty. And this was actually part of the good things that part of the things I consider as good with this novel. The way that it describes the horrors of war is just so vivid. It's very clearly detailed, and you can totally see all of the gory, bloody, graphic details on how the horrors of war kind of manifested physically on the soldiers. But also it explores the psychological effect of war on the soldiers as well. And that part is also written quite nicely, and it is through that part that we kind of see this side of war, or rather the effect of war that it had on the soldiers, where they come to rely on one another. They develop camaraderie. They develop friendship, relationships with each other, and they sort of just kind of lean onto each other for support during the fighting. And this is the part where it gets really tender, really emotional, and that part I think is very nicely written. So I would say that the war fiction part of this novel is very good. It's quite excellent. I would probably give it 4 stars for that. But but the romance part of this novel is not so good. So the romance part starts with the story of Stephen, like I said earlier, where he meets Isabel and then falls in love. Well, I actually expected that the romance part would be as equally as epic as the war fiction part. The war fiction part was epic, and it was well written. It was just awesome. But the romance, it just didn't reach the same level of epicness. Basically what happens is that this whole relationship thingy, I was a reader of this book. I mean, obviously. As a reader, I kind of followed what the characters were doing, okay? And suffice to say that, if characters are falling in love, we're supposed to feel their love, feel their passion, feel their feelings for one another, because we're kind of like third wheeling all the way. But we are supposed to feel it, And I didn't feel any of that. I didn't feel the love. I see the characters falling in love. They say to one another that are falling in love. They like each other. They have sex, blah, blah, blah. But I just didn't feel anything. And it all just seemed like a case of love at first sight, very heavy on just passion, not so much love, like as in communication-based love going on. We don't see a lot of communications happening between Stephen and Isabel. They just sort of consummate the relationship based on their feelings that they had for one another, and it just didn't feel real, and therefore it didn't have that strong enough of a emotional impact in terms of a love story or a romance story. Another part about this story is that this book, it feels like it has this really strong masculine voice, or something that I would consider as masculine voice. Typically, what I consider as the masculine writing voice is that they're usually written by male authors, obviously, but there is also like stronger emphasis on the things that are practical or pragmatic, actions. So it kind of feels a little bit distant when it comes to emotions. There is not so much deep dive into the emotional part of the story, and that kind of happened in here. But it's not like 100% like that, because in the war fiction part, we definitely see like a very good exploration of the emotions of the soldiers. But in the romance part, that is where the emotional expression just didn't feel successful, especially when it comes to women or writing of women. Not only we didn't, I didn't get like a strong enough description of how the women are feeling in this book. The way women are written is also it feels quite stereotypical. The way women's bodies are written, especially women's private parts, especially in the more intimate scenes, just didn't feel like it feels weird. It feels awkward. The kinds of terms that they were used was kind of weird, and it just, overall, it just didn't do the female characters in this book justice. So, in short, the romance part of this novel it feels much more like a adventure of a hormonally induced, lusty, behaving 20-year-old. That is Stephen. Yeah, he was fairly young in this novel. But anyway, those two parts of this book kind of cancel each other out, and so it ended up being fairly mediocre for me. I think that this book would have been a little bit more successful if it were only the war fiction part and the writer decides not to include the romance part, because the romance just does not feel like romance. The story of the relationship, or should I say relationships, spoiler, I don't know. I would think it's only relationship, not relationships. But anyway, the story of the relationships and the romance, it just didn't work in this novel. So, yeah. Anyway, next book that I finished was The Restaurant of Love Regained by Ito Ogawa. So this was a book that I finished today, and it was an okay book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and this book was originally written in Japanese and translated into English by David Karashima. So The Restaurant of Love Regained is sort of like a I would say a prodigal daughter kind of a story. We start by seeing this main character. Her name is Rinko. She lives in the city, but she lives in the city and she works as a waitress. I think she works at a restaurant, and she has a boyfriend. But one day she returns home and she realizes that her boyfriend has left, and with the departure of her boyfriend, her cooking utensils are all gone as well. So she's left with this like empty apartment. She's really heartbroken. She's really sad with that, and so she decides to go back to her village, which was the place that she left a few years before. So yeah, there's kind of a prodigal child plotline going on. But that's where the story starts. Basically, after she returns to the village, she realizes that she sort of discovers that she has this opportunity to explore her love for food. Basically, while she was in the city, she has been doing work that relates to food as well. She has been working in a restaurant after all. But it was in the village that she discovers that she can actually do more, something more with that. And so she decides to open a restaurant in her village. And at the same time, with her return to the village, she is also kind of trying to navigate her relationship with her mom, which was not exactly warm to begin with. I mean, that was kind of like the whole thing that happened when she left the village a few years before that. She was never really close to her mom. She does not really have a good relationship with her mom. It's pretty tense. So she kind of has to navigate her relationship with her mom as well, while trying to deal with opening this restaurant. And what's interesting is that the restaurant that she opens in the village is actually something that is fairly unique. Basically, the restaurant will only serve one set of patrons at one time, and how it operates is that she would ask the customers beforehand what they want to eat, what they want her to cook, and so after they tell her that they want to eat certain things, she will prepare the meal. And when the customers come to restaurant, she will serve the food that was already agreed, for preparation. And the highlight of this novel is that the things that Rinko cooks in her restaurant that she serves to her customers would somehow inexplicably cause some kind of a almost magical or fantastical effects on the customers, and it would somehow change some aspects of their life. Maybe they experience the change emotionally or physically or even mentally, but usually after eating Rinko's food, the customers would experience some positive change, and therefore her restaurant has gained this kind of reputation of something that is a place where magic can happen. But it is in her, it is while operating this restaurant that Rinko kind of realizes that she sort of discovers something about her past, especially when it comes to her mom and all that. So basically this book is kind of about unresolved issues, while at the same time it is a very almost anthemic ode to food. I found that the food that is being written in here is very diverse, even though the book is written by a Japanese author. It was written in Japanese. The book takes place in a Japanese village. The kinds of food that is being talked about in this book, the kinds of food that Rinko cooks in her restaurant, is very diverse, very cosmopolitan. You see so many different kinds of cuisine. You have Japanese cuisine, Chinese, Korean, French, Indian, Italian. You have typical American Western. You also have Turkish food. So many different kinds of food are being discussed here, and it feels so interesting in a way, and the way that the writer writes about how food is prepared, the way that the preparation step is being written also seems to suggest some level of confidence in terms of the knowledge about the food. And I feel that is certainly something that I appreciate very much, because I myself personally like to cook. I mean, I kind of made that demonic steamed bun in the beginning of this video, but then again, I like to cook other things as well that are less demonic. But I guess I was able to kind of appreciate the way that food is written in here, and there is so much joy in the writing of the food. That said, I do think that this book do have a bit of some shortcomings. Like, there are certain gaps in terms of the events that happen in here, like some kind of things that just simply weren't really explored. Like, I don't really know why the boyfriend just sort of leaves Rinko in the beginning of this novel, and why he takes the cooking utensils with him as well. I don't really understand that. And there is also another part that I found out after reading this book, and also after reading the reviews. There is a part that is particularly off-putting, probably for some readers. So this is kind of like a trigger warning. If you are interested in reading this book, there will be a couple of scenes that concerns animal slaughter. I mean, this book is about food and food preparation after all, and the food in here are not necessarily vegan. So there will be descriptions of animal slaughter, animal butchering in this book, which is fairly graphic, but especially one scene of butchering, which is actually a little bit prolonged. It lasts a few pages long, which I think is going to be a little bit disturbing for some readers because of how certain emotional connections with certain animal is established in the beginning of this book. So I might have said that in a spoilery manner, but but anyway, watch out for that if you are interested in reading this book. But I would say this book overall, it is something that I consider as a feel-good book. If you read this book with the intention of seeing it as a literary book, it might be a hit or miss book. I actually started out expecting to see something literary in this book, which, to a certain extent there may be, but I realized that if I were to view this book in that, through that lens, I didn't really enjoy it. So I just kind of decided to ditch the literary lens, and I just kind of wore my feel-good lens and just focus on that. And I think that way the book actually worked better for me. So there was plenty enough joy in this book, plenty enough celebration. There are some dark parts in this book that relates to death, not only death of animals but also death of people. But yeah, also on the note of it being a feel-good book, it's not a feel-good book that is extremely sweet or sappy. So I just kind of want to say that, it's a feel-good book, but it has enough level of suffering in it. Even the ending feels somewhat of a bittersweet. So yeah, I think I kind of like this book. 4 out of 5 stars. If you decide to try this book and to read it, keep in mind the trigger warning that I just mentioned earlier. But yeah, other than that, I think it's a fairly good book. Yeah, pretty sweet. So I suppose that's all for this week's video. And I don't think I'll be mentioning the books that I'm currently reading right now because they're kind of the same as the books that I mentioned last week anyway. And yeah, I feel that I don't know, I just find it boring to mention the same set of books that, I am still reading this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And yeah, so I'm not going to mention any of those books that I'm currently reading. If I finish any of them, I will mention them in the next video. Who knows when that will be. But yeah, I guess that's all for now. So I'll see you again in the next video. Until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.